Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. In today's pod, we look at what is currently driving prices in Europe's carbon market. In October, prices were trading between €65 and €70, but now have soared to levels last seen in mid-December, above 90. What's the reason for the latest upturn in prices, and what can we expect in the weeks to come? Helping me, Richard Sverrisson, to talk about current dynamics in Europe's carbon market is our old friend, Ingvild Sørhus of Greenfact. A warm welcome to you, Ingvild.
Thank you, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here.
Perfect. And also I hear congratulations are in order because you've changed jobs.
Yeah, it's one of my kind of dinosaur moving on. It's been 15 years in my previous job, so now it was time to try something else. But in the best market in the world, the UTS still. So that's fun. Exactly,
and very exciting, I'm sure.
Yes, it's even if it's in the same market, it's something completely new as well. So it's very fun.
Perfect. I mean, let's get down to what's happening currently in the ETS. There's been an upturn in prices. What's that all about?
I think it's probably several reasons behind that, but it's I think one of the first and foremost is that we have an agreement on the EU ETS deal. I mean, the Fit for 55 big legislative package has been kind of discussed for a really long time now. Of course, we knew the contours and kind of the big picture of that previously, after we saw kind of Parliament's position and the Council or the Member States' positions. But then in December, we had the final agreement. So, I mean, it's a provisional agreement. So we're waiting for the final rubber stamping, but all the elements are now agreed between the lawmakers. And of course, when these files are open and the discussions is ongoing, it's always this, what could kind of potentially be changed, or what is the final outcome of some of the most kind of important elements. So I think that's kind of the certainty that we now have a deal. I think that's positive for the market. But also, I mean, half of December is without auction volume. So, of course, it's always this, everyone knows that it's less auction volume in December, but it's always a supportive factor, I would say. So I think those two probably are some of the supportive elements. And I also would point to one element that was agreed is also this, because it was a discussion up front to limit the access or market access to non-compliance entities. And when that kind of was not supported, or kind of that was in some of the earlier discussions in the negotiations, we saw that was not likely to survive. And there seemed to be, so I think that also assured the market a bit when we saw that news coming out.
Yeah, I mean, we'll return to that later and the role of potentially, when you say non-compliance, we're talking speculators in the market, or so-called speculators, or financial utilities, or those that don't have need to be compliant in the market. But if we can talk about the market reform, so this is pretty much a done deal.
Yeah.
And what are the main elements of it, and how will it affect the market sort of in the coming years?
Of course, one thing is that we are going to 2030 with a new emission reduction target. I mean, we have known that for a while, and we know that the cap needs to be heavily reduced in order to reach that target. First and foremost, it will be a much faster reduction in the linear reduction, or the linear reduction factor will happen much more or faster than under the current legislation. Of course, that has always kind of been priced in for some time, but of course now we have landed that agreement. And also this two-off rebasing that will happen. I mean, the Commission came out with when they came out with their proposal, they said kind of this one-off rebasing to better adjust the cap to actual emissions. Now the agreement is that this will happen over 2 years. So of course, looking up to 2030, it will be quite tight it will be tighter years ahead. But also interesting is to see kind of what happens after 2030, I think is one of the things that is quite interesting as well. Because now we see with this agreement that the cap is going fast down to zero in the EU ETS, and will hit kind of zero, or with the current framework that will kind of go down to zero in 2039. So of course, I mean, we're looking ahead at a tighter future up to 2030, but it's, if you look kind of bit further ahead. I think that's kind of one of the big things. And of course, that you will see new sectors coming in, maritime, that will start to be phased in already from 2024 with full compliance from 2026. Of course, that's a new actor in the market, and how will kind of that affect the market dynamic as well? And also, I mean, CBAM is also, I mean, that was kind of on the table for a long time, that we will have the CBAM, and gradually that will, for instance, decrease the free allocations to those industry sectors that is covered by CBAM. So
CBAM,
of course,
the CBAM is the cross-border adjustment mechanism, also known as the carbon border tax.
Yes. So it's more kind of those exporting goods to Europe, or kind of import to Europe. They will be exposed to a similar carbon price as the industry in Europe. So it will be closely linked to the EUA price. So I think that will be quite interesting as well to see how these companies outside of Europe, I mean, they know that the CBAM price, or the certificate for CBAM, that will be linked to the EUA price. And we could, of course, see that, okay, if you want to hedge your carbon risk, in that sense, you could also have like interest from those companies that don't necessarily have compliance obligations within the EUTS. So I think we are looking ahead at some changing market dynamics in the years going forward. So that will be quite interesting to see the horizon, how active these participants are, how do they hedge? Do they hedge like multiple years ahead? So I think that will be. We are looking at some quite interesting years ahead when it comes to market dynamics, I think. Absolutely,
and it's becoming more attuned to sort of global factors as well that are coming in, global industry. Do you think the carbon border tax or CBAM would prevent a lot of the carbon leakage that's often talked about? That would actually do what it is intended to do?
Yeah, so I mean, that's the goal, right? You want to have European industry within Europe, but you also want a greener European industry. And I think by having this CBAM, of course, that is kind of the attempt to push other countries to green their industry as well. And if not, they will be, they have to pay for not greening their industry. So I think this is, I mean, it's been seen as both a carrot and a stick, that you want to incentivize also the surrounding countries. I mean, we don't have a linked EUTS or carbon price, but of course, this is more towards kind of at least some linking thinking.
I mean, and if I go back to the maritime sector, I mean, that's also quite significant because there are, significant or large-scale emitters of greenhouse gases. How do you see that panning out? Because there was a lot of issues with the aviation within Europe, international travel, that people coming from other parts of the world landing in Europe. Do you think that will be the same kind of discussions with the maritime sector, or has that already been decided?
I mean, we have landed on that half of the inbound and half of the outbound emissions will be covered. Whether we will have the similar discussions as or the problems that we had when including the international aviation, I think is yet to be seen. Just listening to some lawmakers said that this was not going to be the same issue or copy-paste of the international, or kind of when including international aviation. But it's going to be interesting to see.
And certainly lots happening there in the maritime sector, talk of liquid LNG or, liquid hydrogen, whatever, on to fuel those ships. But if we return to current price dynamics, there has been talk of that the rally we've seen over the last sort of week or so has been due to speculators returning to the market. They had a net short position of about 9 million EUAs about 10 days ago. Is that something that you see as well?
Yeah, good question. It's kind of what is the reason behind everything. Of course, I think, I mean, they're more active now than when we didn't know if they were going to be limited. But of course, I mean, it's now we're getting into compliance. We're kind of in the compliance season as well. So what is kind of the speculators, what are the compliance buyers, what is kind of the reason behind. It's always a bit tricky to pinpoint, but I think we can see kind of the shift in the positions from week to week with the investment funds, for instance, is kind of a sign that we see these participants as more active. But now they have a net short position, so maybe betting on some price corrections then, I guess.
But very interesting dynamic that, maybe they're coming in. And, I think if I could ask you about your expectations for, the full 22 emissions, was it kind of a very polluting year, more so than the year before? It was obviously, we saw the return of coal-fired and a lot of fossil fuel generation on the power side. But on the industry side, there was a lot of demand destruction. How did that kind of balance out? Or what are your expectations?
So, of course, like power sector emissions is up because of the reasons you said. You had more coal burn, more lignite, less nuclear. So you were reliant on more kind of these polluting power sector emissions. But of course, on the other hand, you saw quite a lot of demand disruption. So, you had lower power demand, more renewables. So in that sense, power sector emissions are going to be, or are expected to be up for 2022 compared to 2021. But on the other hand, we will see lower industry emissions. Whether it will kind of totally net out the increase in the power sector is probably, or maybe not.
Yeah. And how do you expect, we talked about the compliance season, is it like from now and basically till 1st of April, isn't it? So it's how do you expect that to sort of pan out in the weeks ahead? That could we see prices sort of head towards 100 euros or dip back towards 70, 80? What are your expectations?
Yeah.
I'm putting you on the spot here, Ingvild, but this is what the listeners want to know,
Good question, as always, and we always ask ourselves about exactly the same. Compliance season, reporting is 1st or end of March, and then we have compliance end of April. So basically, like 30th of April is kind of when the 1st of April is when we see the verified emissions. We've seen quite strong auctions lately. And also, I think we are starting to see kind of market being a bit influenced by the option expiry, the March option expiry. And we see kind of the largest movement around 100 leg, like the call option, and higher. So, of course, if that starts to kind of influence the market, we could see kind of prices are getting attracted to 100. But at the same time, we have this big unknown for this year, and that's the Repower EU, because some of the sale will come from like selling additional EUAs for funding the Repower. We don't have much information on how that will play out, how kind of when will the volume be added to the auction calendars? When will how much volume will be auctioned this year? I know that I think we will see some information from the Commission, probably not too long. So of course that comes within this compliance window. And I think it will also be a difference. Will we see kind of volumes already be added before summer? Or will we kind of see the volumes only will be added to after summer? But then, we have a bit more clarity on how much we can expect also for 2024 to be added. So I think this is a bit of a downside risk to the market, or at least keeping a bit lid on the gains, perhaps. But just looking at the price movement over the last few days, it's we could see attempts to kind of test 100 as well. I wouldn't kind of rule that out completely, at least. Yeah.
But the auction calendar, you say, could be a bearish factor going forward? I
think because we don't know how much of the Repower volume will come to the market this year. And that's still unknown.
And that's through the MSR mechanism, isn't it, with the Market Stability Reserve mechanism?
So that will be extra sales from front-loading of the Innovation Fund and front-loading of the member states' auction volumes. So that is really kind of, at least for the member states, it's very clearly stated that will be from the last last years of phase 4 will be added to the front, these front years. How the volumes from the innovation fund will be moved, if it will be just front loading or if it will be, because already now we're seeing like 40 million ton per year is being auctioned for the innovation fund. But if this 40 will still stay the same for the next few years, or if that will kind of be reduced and you will see some front loading, but not the total amount that is required from the Repower EU sale. So I think that's it's going to be super interesting to see what the Commission is bringing to the table and the modalities around how this will happen and how. Because of course the sale of Repower is a monetary target. It's not a fixed volume. So of course, how will they also adjust this? How will they adjust the volumes? How much? I mean, will it be kind of on a yearly basis that they will reassess if they have kind of injected enough to the market, or will it be on a shorter scale? Or how will they do it? I think it's quite a lot of questions around these volumes. But I think that's the. I would say that's the big X factor for also the compliance. I mean, you will have some support from compliance season, but I think this is maybe kind of the big uncertainty.
Well, very interesting. I think the devil is in the details. But when do you expect that kind of clarity to emerge? Are we talking early May or before then? Was your guess as good as mine?
Yes, I think so. I think this is, or I hope to see it rather soon. I kind of know that the Commission is working on this, but of course they can't say anything on the expectations yet. But some clarity on the timeline, I think we will see, hopefully. Sooner rather than later. But when kind of then the question is, when will we see the first auction volume, which is like a different story.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. It's very hard to keep up, with all the other issues and proposals on the table in the wider energy markets. How do you view? Obviously, a key driver here is the macroeconomic outlook and the economic activity or industrial activity, power sector emissions. What's your view here? Are we, there is talk of we're on the verge of recession in Europe. What's your view, and what could be the impact on the ETS?
I mean, when you look at the economic outlook, like the forecast, I mean, it's a bit grim still for Europe. I think what has changed slightly is that we, for instance, with the latest IMF economic forecast, it is slightly on the more positive note. They have adjusted it up compared to the previous forecast for 2023. So in that sense, it's it's less grim than we kind of expected, maybe than a bit earlier last year. But I think of course, it's much linked also to the energy prices. I mean, I don't know if you can say it's been kind of a best case winter where it seems to be a bit less stress on the energy market. But we also have to remember the war is still ongoing. We will have the same kind of a risk of, do we have sufficient supply for next winter when it comes to gas, especially? We have quite solid storage levels now. We will kind of have seen that we have survived a winter without the inflow of Russian gas coming to Europe. But of course, I mean, it's still kind of, I would say, a bit of a risk there as well. So it's probably kind of a bit too early to say it's a bright future laying ahead of us for 2023. But of course, this latest signals is more on the brighter side than the opposite. And of course, kind of lower gas prices, which has, or lower gas and energy prices, which has limited industrial activity in Europe. Of course, when they're easing, it's also kind of make life easier bit for the industry sector, even if some will still kind of probably curtail some of their production still for 2023.
So, I mean, like you say, I think we've been saved by the weather, really. You know, I think from October, November, December. I mean, December was quite cold, and some areas of Europe also in January. But I mean, it's quite remarkable. Also, as you pointed out, that we've gone from being dependent on 40% of our gas from Russia to now being able to live with almost none of it. So I think that's been quite an achievement. But as a carbon market analyst, Ingvild, are you very closely following what's happening in the gas market? Is that one of the main drivers you see for carbon prices in the months to come?
I think that's an important driver. I mean, we are getting closer. Probably, I mean, we're talking a bit on fuel switching levels. But of course, I don't think we will see a huge amount of fuel switching anyway, even if we're getting closer with like easing gas prices and higher carbon prices. Because, I mean, it will still be, do we have sufficient gas to cover for additional demand from the power sector? It's probably limited. So, of course, I mean, carbon has more taken direction from gas. But we also, I mean, if we suddenly see now a bull run in the carbon market, we could also see the opposite happening, that gas has to kind of move out of the fuel switching range if carbon is moving into those areas as well. So of course, kind of the energy complex is very important for the carbon market, and also, I mean, also the amount of emission-free power generation. So of course, I mean, the weather forecast, how much wind are produced, how much solar, what's the hydro situation, what's the nuclear situation, these things, because that kind of will set how much emission-free power generation we'll have in Europe. And of course, the top-up will be with the dirty stuff that needs to cover their emissions through the carbon market.
Absolutely. Is there a case for saying that, you know, given maybe the limited potential for fuel switching and coal plants sort of really at full output, probably for another year at least, that you could see carbon prices edge up above 150 and find a range above 100 to sort of within 100, 110, 120 even?
I wouldn't kind of rule it out. I mean, I've been in this market long enough to know that we shouldn't rule out anything. And I guess, I mean, we know now that with the agreement on the Fit for 55 deal, we will have the implementation of the new legislation from 2024. We will see the first two off rebasing in 2024. We will have a steeper linear reduction factor. And if we kind of allow for more fossil fuel burn in the power sector and kind of keep those levels at high levels, then of course you're just postponing the problem. I mean, you are getting Europe's emissions down to zero. I mean. Quite soon, or I mean, depends on kind of the horizon, of course, you're looking at. But
and your urgency, yeah.
But of course, I mean, it's at some point that kind of, or of course, the price needs to reflect the reduction that needs to take place in order to reach EU's emission goals. Yeah,
for sure. And You talked with the carbon border tax or the CBAM, we're getting more kind of indirect linkage to other areas of the globe. Do you see any movement in the way that ETS being linked to other markets, you know, like North America, parts of Asia, New Zealand? Have you seen any moves in that direction? Or is that global carbon price, is that just the dreamland, really, Ingvild?
I think if we say that, the ideal should be a global carbon price, I think that's very, very far away. But I think that, and that's a bit because, I mean, you will have different abatement options in various countries, right? So it's not necessarily that the carbon price that is needed to trigger emission reductions in one country is the same as you have in Europe, for instance. So in that sense, I mean, the goal should be to reduce emissions and reduce emissions and reduce emissions. And as long as you have a carbon price that actually gives that signal, I think that's what is needed everywhere. And of course, I think there could be like quite a lot of lessons learned from the EU ETS. I mean, it's first when you have the policy, like that you have this strong policy signal, that you have proper reduction targets, then you have kind of the, that will actually deliver the emission reductions that is required if we are serious about the path that we need to be on. But linking, I don't see necessarily kind of that's just around the corner for this market. I mean, it's a bit, of course, it will be linking through the CBAM in that sense, because let's say that if you are covered by a emission trading system in another jurisdiction, you can kind of you are not, that carbon cost that you pay with your emission trading system, that will be deducted from the CBAM that you need to pay in Europe. So in that sense, that's kind of the linking part. I think it will be, I mean, we haven't seen much linking discussions now for the UK ETS. That's probably, if I would guess on something, that's probably, or in my view, that is probably the link that we will maybe see the fastest. Yeah.
That could maybe come first, yeah. Absolutely, Ingvild. I think, from what you're talking about here and the regulatory moves coming, the ones being proposed, the outlook of the market to 2030, is clearly this is a very closely, tightly regulated market and space, which then we've seen on the voluntary carbon markets globally. We've seen a lot of international tension on how some dodgy markets or how some activities and operations that maybe don't actually deliver the carbon reductions that they promise, or that there's some issues with the projects. That's been a big focus. Do you think the ETS has been tarnished by this, or do you think that maybe more companies would want to come to the ETS where they see this tightly regulated space that is actually, it's a very different case from the voluntary sector?
I think more the latter. But I think we also have seen that over the last few years as well, that it's been attractive because you have this climate integrity, especially after 2019, when you had this market stability reserve and kind of agreement on tighter climate targets for EU. So I think the climate integrity is quite high, and is probably seen as quite high from those that might want to engage in the EU ETS, or just want to engage in the carbon market, but finds then the EU ETS both as a liquid market, but also with high climate integrity. But of course, it will be interesting to see kind of how the voluntary space. I mean, you have touched upon some of the problems, right? That there are so many things out there. There are many things that are good. There are many things that are not good. So, of course, finding a common standard and finding these standards that you have this climate integrity, because, of course, you need also funding, and you need also emission reduction taking place in that space as well. So, of course, it's important to not lose the integrity, or kind of find a way to have high climate integrity for the voluntary space. But it's probably kind of also healthy discussions, right? That you want to kind of pinpoint those that don't necessarily have high climate integrity, and at least make people aware that it is a risk also in the voluntary space, even if it's you maybe kind of see these glossy things that will kind of have these nice pictures and promise whatever. But of course, it's complicated. I've been in the market since the CDM was a big and shiny, and of course there were kind of problems with the CDM market as well. So hopefully we will see some path for those that will kind of be serious in the market and provide actual emission reductions in that market, because we need private capital flowing into other areas than just the regulated markets.
Absolutely. So hopefully it will drive those reforms where they are needed. And I think the two key words, as you mentioned, I think integrity, certainly climate integrity, but also robustness of the market. But Ingvild, I could chat for hours, but I think we have to call it a day here. Yeah. So thank you very much for joining the Montel Weekly podcast this week.
Thank you, Rich. It's a pleasure.
So listeners, you can now follow the podcast on our own Twitter account, aptly named the Montel Weekly Podcast. Please direct message any suggestions, questions, or, let us know if you think you have a good idea for a guest on the show. You can also send us an email to podcast@montelnews.com. Lastly, remember to keep up to date with all that's happening in energy markets on Montel News. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.